Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Andrew Cooperrider podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooper. Who else hosting? Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you're listening to this. Don't worry. We are very inclusive of our listeners, so we are happy that you listen at any time at all during the day. But thank you guys so much for joining us. We've got a lot of very exciting topics for us today. We'll be covering a few news from around Kentucky, a record-breaking amount of money being spent by lobbyists in our state legislature this year. We'll talk a bit about that, what's it mean, and how that money works together with PACs, and how does that actually influence our government, and then how do we fight that? Also, as well, federal government looks like 10 Senate Republicans have signed on to a bipartisan gun control measures. Primarily, it looks like expansions over the red flag gun laws. Also, as well, we've got some news coming out of the recounts, a court hearing going on here that happened today. A little bit of information from just listen to the Zoom of that involving recounts over some things in Kentucky. And also, we have the federal state governments looking at switching up some work days because of the gas prices. But before we jump into it, guys, please hit the share button, like, comment, subscribe, anything you can do to help spread the word. If you're listening on the YouTubes, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to this on Facebook, hit the share. And of course, as always, you can listen to this in the podcast form, Apple, Spotify, so on and so forth. Review it on Apple. Apparently that helps. And we'll dig into it. Once again, guys, thank you for joining us. One more thing, please text Liberty, the word Liberty, to 33777 for all your activism updates. Thousands of people already have. You can join them and stay on top of it. In fact, we're going to talk about how we did beat out one of these lobbyists on a bill this year using that text list to let people know about what they were looking at doing. And I thank you guys so much for doing that and taking part, because it's the only way we're going to win back our state and win back our country. So first off, we have lobbyists spending a record $11 million in just 4 months lobbying our state government. Top spenders, of course, we've got the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce spending $184,000 in just 4 months. And then the second highest spender, we have the Kentucky Hospital Association spending $149,000 in just 4 months. Now, of course, hospitals in general make up, healthcare made up the large amount of our lobbying this 4 months, this legislative session. We saw $1.1 million being spent by hospital associations, healthcare groups, and everything else, all to lobby our government. And we're going to talk about that here in a bit. But first, I kind of want to cover what lobbyists are, because I was posting the other day about lobbying and stuff, and somebody asked, how does this work? How does it operate? Lobbying is essentially this. It's people, private companies that receive money from a organization. Maybe that is a political organization like the Hospital Association, or perhaps it is a company, or sometimes it's taxpayer-funded entities. Millions of dollars of taxpayer funds were spent to these private lobbyists. And essentially what they are is they are individuals that talk to the legislators. Now, we also can talk to our legislators. So you wonder, well, what's so special about this? Well, they represent these entities that can cause a lot of pain for our elected officials, because they control the flow of money, and they're willing to attack them, and they're willing to withhold funds or give them funds if they do the right thing. Frankly, they are running our legislators like a bunch of dogs. They're the ones holding the leash, and they've got the carrots and the sticks. And you better believe they will wield that. And we'll talk about how they did that this primary session. But lobbyists are their mouthpieces. And basically, they're people that generally already have a relationship with the legislature. Most famous, the best well-known lobbyist right now is Babbage. Babbage was a member of our state government. He was actually, I believe, our Secretary of State at one point. And so he had a lot of influence over most of these individuals. He already knows them already. He's a Democrat. And he was, like I said, he was the prior Secretary of State for Kentucky. And so, and he of course filled other roles before that, but I believe that was his last role as far as that goes. But he was also elected. He was also also the state auditor. So, he has this relationship. Basically, what he is he was essentially, he's just a guy who has a lot of relationships with these legislators, and they give them a lot of money. He flows a lot of money into campaigns. It's like this, right? Imagine if you would, you're a person, you're a legislator, you're a normal guy or gal, and unless you're being specific, unless you're trying your hardest to not let it influence you, if you've taken money from associations like the chamber or like some of these other groups that will send out $2,000 or even get people together to gather money on your behalf to send it to you, and they do something like that, they send you those thousands when they want to talk to you, you're going to take their call just because you feel like you owe them something, whether you owe them something or not. And so that starts to play with our government. And what we see from the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, that's the largest spender this year at $184,000. Now, you might have been hearing more about the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, especially through this primary session, just because we've seen the media accurately describing basically Liberty Republicans like myself when I was running as people who were, quote unquote, against the chamber and people who were for the chamber. And we saw a lot of the chamber's key people lose in Northern Kentucky, people like Adam Koenig and Ed Massey. Now, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce sounds innocuous. Generally speaking, your local chambers are groups of small business owners that get together and work for a community and a society that is good for the general area and can help drive business into an area, drive jobs into an area. Generally, these local chambers, your local chamber of commerce, is nothing like the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, because while local businesses run your local chamber, big, large companies run the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. And the key thing that large companies and corporations believe, and the chamber does too, is you can't be trusted with your own money. So if they can take it from you as a taxpayer and use it to invest in their businesses, then that's better for them. Because, of course, they don't care about higher taxes. Actually, they lobby for higher taxes. Famously, they always lobby for a higher gas tax. Why? Because they believe it's better for big business because they have nicer roads to drive on. And of course, as well, it injects money into the economy. And so by creating jobs and what have you, and anything they can do to stop you from misspending your money and to inject it for them to use how they want to invest in these large corporations, they will do. I mean, we saw this way back when with 401ks. 401ks were not actually created to be a retirement plan. They were originally created as a vehicle for the common man to invest in the stock market after the bust in the Great Depression there in the early 1900s, because they needed more money in the stock market. And of course, the very rich people didn't have enough to get the economy booming like they wanted it to. So then they come in and they say, well, look, we'll create these 401ks. Now that's okay. That's an opt-in. That is a choice you had as an individual to put your money into that. But what the chamber looks for is for you to not have a choice. In fact, we in the political sphere joke and we call the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce the Kentucky Chamber of Communism, or sometimes the Kentucky Chamber of Compromise. Basically, what it is they are totally anti-conservative values. There is not a single conservative thing about them. In fact, they don't care about social issues. They care about taking as much money out of your pocket and putting it into the people who pays them pocket. They're getting all their money from these large companies, and they want money from you. That's what they want. Now, I'm all for, as you know, I'm all in on capitalism. I'm all for a free market. But that's not what we have. What we have is a government that takes money out of our pocket and puts it into the pockets of the giant corporations. I'll give you a perfect example, and that's like this Ford deal that took place during that special session where Kentucky taxpayers got almost $500 million taken out of their pockets and given to a private company, Ford, to pay them off to have them build a battery plant here in Kentucky. Of course, this comes on the news that put aside the fact that Ford's looking at possibly shutting down or moving their already established plant here in Louisville due to staffing issues and some other issues. But putting that to the side, that we might just lose as many jobs from Ford as they just promised to bring in, giving us a equal zero, something that way back last year I was warning us about, that as we moved away from gas vehicles, and especially as we're seeing demand drop off for the F-250s and 350s that are being manufactured there in Louisville, as those drop off, we would see that shut down, especially as we see us move to electric, because they're not manufacturing the electric vehicles here in Kentucky. They're doing that in Tennessee. They're just doing batteries here. And so what you see is this Chamber of Commerce pushing forward ideas that deal around with centralizing the power of government and centralizing your money into the government's hands so then it can flow to the corporations. See, this is why as a capitalist, I have so many issues with regulation. It is not because I hate the environment or whatever. It's because I don't trust the government to protect us from companies. In fact, when I see somebody protesting a company or saying, I disagree with this company, a lot of conservatives, sometimes they view it as canceling ones from the left, but that's mainly because we on the right don't typically do that. But that is the market working, and that's how we should be embracing that on the right. When we see somebody like Coke or when we see somebody like State Farm doing, or Disney doing what they're doing, we cancel our memberships, we go elsewhere. We should be outside protesting. Like, if you're a company and you don't change your logo to a rainbow, you're going to have every transgender in the state outside throwing a fit if they find out about it. In the same way, we as conservatives, anytime we're seeing people go into that, we should be battling back with our dollars and everything else, because that is the free market. That was supposed to be the regulation on the companies. It was supposed to be us as consumers making our voices heard with our dollars and also making our voices actively heard. But instead, we've entrusted our government to solve our problems for us because it's easier. Well, what instead is government's run by flawed people. It's run by humans. And humans also seek power beyond anything else. They don't have any greater principles or whatever. They don't care. In fact, I've only been reinforced that here recently. And so instead, the chamber would rather flow these monies, central government, that then turns around and spends money helping those companies tap it. See, the Chamber of Commerce did not spend $184,000 in lobbying. They invested $184,000 in lobbying to control your government. And they lobbied for or against more than 70 bills. Some of those bills include House Bill 28. They lobbied against a bill to stop vaccine mandates from private employers. Lobbied against it. Why? Because they want their private employers to be able to mandate vaccination. Whether they believe that it's good or bad or what have you, they want to be able to do it. Not only does that help Big Pharma, one of the other large contributors, one of the other large corporations, but also as well, there's a lot of pressure coming down from the federal government and incentives, and they wanted to be able to put those in place. They also lobbied for the Kentucky tax reform bill that took away income tax and instead put in place more sales tax options. Now, I'm against an income tax, and we should move to a sales tax. We agree there. But in order to get it done, the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce's bill required that overall funding into the general fund increase by 70% in order for us to get to zero. So they did move away from an income tax, but they want increased revenues into the government. Why? Because the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce wants to be able to control your tax dollars through their lobbying and PAC efforts. Of course, gas tax increases because they need more. In fact, we went to battle and won against them on a bill, House Bill 126 this year, which would have required every high school student to fill out the FAFSA to graduate. That bill ended up, and for anybody who wants to say they weren't pushing that, it's on there. So they're required to disclose the bills they were pushing for or against. And the Chamber of Commerce put House Bill 126 on their list. So they were pushing for that. And not only were they pushing for House Bill 126 to pass, but why did they want it to pass? Well, they wanted more kids going into college, not because kids actually need college in order to be successful or what have you, but because they wanted the universities to make more money. There's federal government dollars sitting out there designated for student aid. Let's get more dollars flowing into the Kentucky economy by getting people to take advantage of that. Who cares if in doing so we saddle kids with tons of debt? Now, FAFSA is not a debt, but if kids are well more likely to go to college, if they feel like they're going to lose out on free money, and then in turn, maybe those kids were never supposed to go to college, they end up pulling out loans and debts. They go into debt for years and years and years, massive debt for an education they never acquire, all because they were required to fill out the FAFSA because the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce wanted a few more tax dollars flowing into our economy. So obviously we have the chamber pushing heavy, and that is where there are people who do represent the chamber and people who don't. And we've seen some of those people who are really carrying those bills for the chamber lose this past primary. And so you can bet, well, they spent $11 million, it's going to get even. I'm sorry, well, they spent $184,000. I guarantee you next year it's going to be even more, because they're going to have to contend with the fact that running their bills gets you removed from office. Additionally, second spender was the Kentucky Hospital Association. Spent about $150,000. 4 months. 4 months, spent $150,000. What bills were they mainly looking for? Well, their big issue this year was about ambulances. You see, in Kentucky, we have something called certificate of need. Essentially, you can't just build a hospital. You have to ask permission from the government to build that hospital because, that's the free market here in Kentucky. Free market and you wonder why your healthcare expenses are so high? It's because you don't have a free market of healthcare. And if you think you do, you are wrong. You don't. The government controls it. And the government's failure to control it is why we have skyrocketing costs and expenses right now, because the government can't do anything well. It will always fail. Historically, governments have always failed. You are the only one who can be trusted to run your money. But yet, they want to control your healthcare systems, determine whether or not you get it. Well, this has come back to bite the hospitals in the butt. Hospitals embrace certificate of need a lot of time because it creates a government enforced monopoly that enables them to not have to compete on an open market. But ambulances are also on certificate of need. In the city of Lexington, there's 3 certificate of needs for ambulances. 2 are held by the fire departments, EMTs, and 1 is held by AMR, a private ambulance service. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This is why it became a fight. So let's take, there is a senior home in Jessamine County called Thompson Hood Veterans Center. And obviously they have an above average amount of medical emergencies. So they go and they get picked up and they get brought in an ambulance to the hospital. And so the hospital's done treating them and needs them to go. They've been in the ER. They're sending them back to Thompson Hood, let's say. Well, in order to send them back to Thompson Hood, they're medically good enough to leave the hospital, but these are people that when they get moved from one place to another have to take an ambulance at all times. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where there's a certain designation where you get to a certain point where you can't be transported just in a car. You have to be medically transported. And so Thompson Hood is one of these. So Jessamine County Fire Department EMTs, they pick up this fella or gal from the Thompson Hood Veterans Center and take him to the hospital in Lexington because, of course, they don't have a good hospital to treat most things out in Jessamine County because certificate of need. But anyway, so they go ahead. They did try to, but they couldn't get the certificate of need approved for building the size of hospital they wanted in Jessamine County. So then it gets taken to the Lexington hospitals where then they get dropped off. Well, when they're ready to be discharged, the hospital's calling up Jessamine County EMTs saying, hey, we need to pick them up. Now, that kind of call to pick up a person from the hospital just to take them back home goes to the bottom of the list, because obviously, like, if you're dying on a roadside, you don't want them to not be able to get to you because they're transporting a perfectly stable individual from the hospital back to the Veterans Center or something like that. That is not prioritizing life over death, or death over life. So, but this became a problem for the hospitals because their beds would fill up with these people. They need to clear out these beds, but they're waiting for the EMTs to come picking up. Most of the time in Jessamine County, how it was working was they waited until they had a call to take somebody to that hospital, and then they'd bring that person in, and then they'd pick up the person they needed to take back, and they'd take them back. That makes sense, conserve energy. The problem is, as I said, the hospitals are filling up. Well, you'd say, well, why don't the hospitals just get their own ambulance that they can have to transport patients? And this began to be that did end up being one of the solutions, I believe, that was in the bill that passed this year. But this goes back to certificate of need, where Baptist Health in Lexington actually did have a ambulance that they used to transport patients, but it was on a certificate of need. And that's that certificate of need that AMR now has, because they bought it from Baptist Health. So the entire problem is hospitals aren't allowed to purchase an ambulance to take people back to Jessamine County, and they need to take people back to Jessamine County because the hospital there wasn't able to be as big as they wanted to be because they couldn't get their certificate of need approved. So now you have beds filling up at a hospital in Lexington because an EMT service ain't bringing them back or quick enough, and so on and so forth. And so this year, the hospitals wanted ambulatory services, EMT services, the board that manages it for the state, the reg board, the regulatory board. It was its own separate board. They wanted that to be a part of the hospital's board. Why? Well, simply put, because they wanted to prioritize trips from the hospital back to the Veteran Center and what have you to be at the same amount of emergency as you dying on a roadside after a car accident, because it's about their bottom line. And some people fought on that. What we saw was the PACs. Now, here's where the PACs come in. So we see Kentucky Hospital Association's PAC. We believe it's their PAC. Everything's connected to them, called the Commonwealth Conservatives. Commonwealth Conservatives LLC. It's not a PAC, sorry. Commonwealth Conservatives LLC coming in and spending money on mailers attacking certain individuals and 4 other individuals. And it was kind of odd to track, if you're us who tracks these things, because you had them sending a mailer attacking Savannah Maddox in Northern Kentucky, but then a mailer attacking Samara Heverin running against Jacob Clark, which Samara Heverin is a person who, for the chamber, for example, has run gas tax bills and everything else. And so you wonder why they are doing that. Well, it all had to do with the vote on the ambulance bill that I was just talking about. And if you voted for the bill, they would send a mailer for you. So as Kim Mosier, they reportedly spent around $20,000 to $30,000 in Kim Mosier's race against her opponent, which never was a threat to begin with. They spent $30,000 just to show that they're going to support her because she ran their bills, and then they attacked other people that didn't run the bill. So you've got them spending $150,000 on lobbying, and then they follow that up by spending, $150,000, $200,000 in expenditures attacking you. So you do this because you're paying lobbyists to come in and talk to people about these bills. And then that's the carrot is the lobbyist. Lobbyist comes in, and while there's some rules about what lobbyists can or can't do, I'll just put it to you this way: to find out a state senator or a House rep is sleeping with or in a relationship with a lobbyist is not uncommon. In fact, one of the most corrupt state senators we've ever had in Kentucky, the most corrupt we currently have sitting, regularly dates lobbyists, often, which isn't a conflict of interest, of course. So, and that's why lobbyists are generally either former legislators that are friends with people, or they're attractive women that they have plying on men in our legislature to try to get them to vote the way they want them to. So not only are they developing these relationships, Not only is there maybe some hazy lines as far as how these lobbying groups flow money and benefits to them, that's the carrot. The stick is the efforts they do in the elections where they're spending 200 grand or so on mailers and attack ads and everything else. So how do we fight that? How do we fight back about it? One, we have to be informed voters. We got to be informed about where we're coming from things from and for. We can't continue to allow our elections to be bought. I mean, they do it because they can get away with it because the voter, not you specifically, you listen to this, I'm sure you're very informed, but the voters as a whole buy it. They buy it. They buy this stuff with enough money. The belief is these state house races, these state senate races can be bought. And there's a lot of evidence to support that idea. And so the biggest way to fight about it is a couplefold. One, to be aware, vote after actually doing a lot of research on each individual, look at their voting record, inform others, volunteer on the campaigns of people you want to support, and then finally, you got to donate. Now we're talking about a lot of money, 11 million a record. Let's say in a year, all these corporations, everything else put in $30 million, okay? So they put in $30 million, let's say a year into lobbying, and then following that up with their political attacks that they do to add the stick function. So the carrot and stick cost total, which you say 30 million a year. Well, there's 4.5 million Kentuckians. Of course, that's children and everything else too, right? But they're buying our votes for the low price of just $6.67 a person in Kentucky. It's not very much. So if we cut that in half and even double it, that's $12 a person. And then let's say half those people are not Democrats, but Republicans. And we're talking about Republican legislators because, of course, they're in the power. Now we're up to $24. So let's go crazy with it. Let's double that even. That's $50. If just every person who not even just votes, just every person who's active donates $50 to $100 a year to candidates, we would be able to outspend the quote unquote establishment, corrupt lobbying groups, corporations, we'd be able to outspend them at our own state level legislatures, which of course feeds into our federal. But see, that's the problem. This is why it continues, is because it requires action. It requires action from people. But that doesn't mean we give up. We work to constantly activate people and get them involved because we've proven that we can win. I can't think of a single primary in our state Senate or in our state House where it was an open seat that went in the direction that the chamber or the Kentucky Hospital Association would have preferred. I can't think of a single one. I also know that 3 of their major bill runners got taken down in primaries as well. So as long as we continue this trend of them being unable to win open seats and taking down 3 or 4 of their people every year, it doesn't take that long for us to flip our legislature. And it doesn't take that long for us to be able to have a government that actually represents the people as far as that's concerned. So disappointed to see that 11 million a record, because obviously that means they think they're going to get a return on their investment. We need a government. We need a state legislature that makes it clear they will not see a return on their investments, their corrupt investments. So moving on from that topic there, federal gun government, looking at gun control, we had 10 Senate Republicans. I don't know if you'd call it breaking ranks, because McConnell assigned them to take place in bipartisan gun control talks. And, you know, those 10 Senate Republicans. So what they did is they signed on to a letter that would support a couple of things. There's 20 senators total, but 10 GOP lawmakers, which is enough to get over the 60 hump, many of whom are strong supporters of gun rights and the NRA, because the NRA actually takes a less than strong stance about gun laws. But anyways, so it might be enough to get over. So what they've signed on to is basically a deal that says, look, this is what we'll look at. And it's a lot of funding for schools. That's good. Mental health funding, which we increase our mental health funding, I feel like, every year. And yet, despite the amount we talk about it and spend on it and everything else, it just keeps getting worse because we're trying to replace something that the church and our local community, a community fiber, a nuclear family, we're trying to reproduce or get over or somehow correct what we've lost by getting rid of the core conservative values of our family, the nuclear family, as well as the church from the community. Getting away from that, I believe, has caused most of our mental health issues, and it can't be replaced. And it makes a lot of sense because when you were messing up as a kid or going through something, you had a community to kind of surround you, let the parents know what was going on. The parents took an active role in that. You can't spend enough money to make up for that. You just can't. But that's not going to stop the government from trying because, of course, acknowledging that they can't solve a problem will never work for the government. They have to try to solve it. They always do. So who are these 10 Republicans? So they've signed on to, funding at schools, things like that. One of the stickers is the funding cannot be new funding. It has to be cuts elsewhere. But funding for like school resource officers and mental health, things like that. But also there's some other things they're adding on. Some of this not as bad. Some of it, some issues, right? But first, let's talk about the 10 Republicans. Here we go. We've got, let's see, Senator from Texas, John Cornyn. We've got, he was actually put on there by Mitch McConnell to kind of lead the negotiation from the Republican side. We got Roy Blunt from Montana. We've got Rob Portman from Ohio, Richard Burr, North Carolina, Mitt Romney, surprise, which, by the way, for all of you guys sitting there being like, Mitt Romney crosses the aisle and everything else, and he's a rhino, right? I'm with you. I agree with you. But let's keep in mind, he received more than $13.5 million in donations from the NRA. What? So the NRA, this guy who's the weakest Republican, is still funneling money to him because they don't care, actually. They're almost controlled opposition. Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Lindsey Graham. No, anybody shocked about that one? No, okay. Nobody's shocked about that one. Pat Toomey. And so, they make up the people who've penned this. Now you say, well, what's in the bipartisan deal? Well, like I said, they've got additional funding for some things like that. Now, the things that start to get controversial, they are not raising the age to purchase an AR to 21. That is not on the list of things, though they are requiring for kids under 21 to do more of a check into, I guess there's a database of mental health issues to see if that's there. They're tightening up who needs to run a background check. And then this is the third thing that just starts getting really iffy for a lot of people, myself included. And that is strengthening and increasing red flag gun laws. What this is when anybody can make a claim that you are mentally unstable, you shouldn't have guns, and then drag you in front of a judge where now you have to defend your right to own guns. You have not committed a crime. Let's make that clear. You have not committed a crime. You have not done anything else, but some random person has said, this guy shouldn't own guns. And then they drag you in front of a judge, and then that one judge gets to decide whether or not your constitutional rights can continue. One would say you should at least have a jury, but one would mainly say you should at least be convicted of a crime. Now, they say this is if we only had red flag gun laws, this shooting in Texas, this Uvalde shooting wouldn't have occurred. What are you talking about? This kid, take the kid in Texas, okay? Let's say we don't have red flag gun laws. This kid would hold up bags of dead cats online. Bags of dead cats. Geez, last I checked, that was a crime. Was it not? Yet nobody reported him to the police for it. Or certainly he wasn't charged with a crime. A crime that then would have caused him, most likely, because, when you've got a kid holding up bags of dead cats, I think all of us know that's kind of the behavior of a serial killer. In fact, I think that's one of the questions we ask when we find a serial killer, a new serial killer. We ask, did they kill small animals when they were children? Because that's what they're known for. A clear indicator of a future serial killer killing cats, bags of them. He then would have been referred over to for psychiatric evaluation. That would have showed up on a background check. He could have been designated at that point to say, hey, this guy can't own guns. He's a violent criminal. There was charges he committed. The problem is nobody turned him in. And it's not, and it's because when they have these issues, you don't want to charge them with a crime. Because, we believe, or not we, of course, I don't believe this, but people believe that they should, if they turn somebody in for a crime, it's the wrong thing. It's a bad thing to do. That they're just a little different. They're just a little different. And we just need to be tolerant. We just need to tolerate the murder of cats putting in bags and taking pictures. We just have to tolerate it because he's just a misunderstood fella. That's the mindset of these people. Instead of saying that guy committed a crime, he stuffed a bunch of dead cats in a bag, arrest him. And if we'd done that once again, he wouldn't have been able to legally purchase a firearm. See, we don't need new laws. We have laws on the books. But instead, we're going to have this, which will be most likely yielded red flag gun laws, most likely wielded by individuals in a retaliatory way. I mean, it's you see it time and time again. And so the problem here, as I see it, is we don't enforce the laws we have that would designate a person unable to purchase a firearm if they were breaking those laws. And then on top of that, we're talking about taking away a person's constitutional right. Let's keep in mind, this right does not come from the government. Who are you to regulate that in the first place? But taking that aside, it's a right that comes from God, the right to defend one's self. And I'm sorry, but if guns are the ultimate equalizer between no matter race, gender, ideology, anything. It is the ultimate level playing field. That's why you have a God-given right to a firearm. Because you have a God-given right to be able to protect yourself from somebody, no matter how big they are or whatever. But of course, we want to take that right away from people without even going through without even accusing them of a crime. Now, if they are accused of a crime, you have a probation hearing and then, or not probation, a bail hearing and everything else. When they're first arrested, you have initial hearings. The judge at that initial hearings can say, take away his guns. We can't let him have guns. At the first hearing, that's like a few days after you get arrested, the judge can issue your guns be taken away when you're arrested for a crime. But to force a person to defend themselves against an accusation they're just mentally unfit to have their rights that God has given them seems a little too far to me, especially when there's, once again, plenty of crimes these people are committing that we just aren't catching them for. I can remember several of these shootings. I remember there's a shooting on an Air Force base where the Air Force, not an Air Force base, but the guy was in the Air Force, dishonorably discharged. He shouldn't have been able to purchase a rifle, but the Air Force failed to update the system. We've got this guy, Uvalde shooting, where he purchased a firearm, quote unquote, legally, but he shouldn't have been able to because he was committing crimes violent crimes that would disqualify you from owning a firearm, but nobody bothered to turn him in or say anything about it. And so it seems to me we have, one, a process and system failures, and two, we've got, once again, a culture failure. A failure for the culture to sit there and say when somebody commits a crime, they should be reported for doing so. Simple as this. But it's grabbing traction, and we hope that I don't know. There's too many Republicans that are retiring in the Senate. There's too many that are there, and really in November, I mean, the Republicans know you're not going to vote for a Democrat because, well, you're not going to vote for a Democrat, and they know that, and they'll take advantage of that in order to not be actually represent people. And of course, will the voter forget in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years when this person's up for re-election in a primary? Who knows? But moving on to that, we've got our first reports of hand count costs for auditing elections here in Kentucky. So for those who are unaware, there's a few people who've requested put in a request for the ability to hand count the ballots cast in their election. We're in the first cost. And this was in a court hearing that was earlier this morning. I'm recording this on Monday, June 13th. It was earlier this morning. But first reports of hand count costs. You ready? To count 6,100 votes, the judge wants to charge the candidate $21,000. $21,000. 6,100 votes. They believe it will take 6 people 9 days to count 6,100 votes. Now, I've already done the math for you guys that are sitting there trying to do that. That is 432 man hours, assuming 8 hours a day. So at 432 man hours of counting, that is a pace of 14 votes per man hour. That is this judge has calculated the cost to be that me, a human, can only count 14 votes an hour. To say it another way, that's like less than one every 5 minutes. That's like one. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's marked there. That's a name there. That's right. Okay. One. Let's see here. Let me get my readers. Need to put those on. I'm too fast. Hold on. That's 2. All right. That's the pace they think they're moving at. On top of that, in this 21,000 is reportedly $5,000 for food and snacks. That is a budget of $92 a day per person per day. $92 a day per person per day for food and snacks. Is Jeff Ruby's catering this? Are they popping champagne? Is there going to be caviar got on the ballots? Because that is an astronomically high amount of money. Are we tipping the delivery guy? Is that it? $21,000 to count 6,100 votes. Now, one could say they're trying to price a person out of doing this. Now, she does, the candidate in question does get a refund if there is a major discrepancy. Now, I'm not saying candidates shouldn't have to pay for their own recount if they're over a certain percentage or what have you. I think that's fine because we don't want to be blowing through taxpayer dollars. But we could do it at a reasonable rate. And we could do it to say, okay, what is a reasonable rate to count these at? 6,100 votes, one should be able to be counted in like 2 days with 6 people. That's a third of the cost. So that takes it down to $7,000. Starting to get a little more reasonable. But $21,000, it's as if they're trying to pay some out. Also, too, she gets a refund if there is a major discrepancy. Well, what's a major discrepancy? Is it 5 percentage point difference? 10 percentage point difference? Keep in mind, the machines in this case are brand new. Never been counted before. Never been audited before. Now, I'm not saying that the election came out incorrectly. I'm not saying there's any issues in the election at all. I'm just saying a person should have a right to a recount that isn't astronomically priced, where we're spending $5,000 in 9 days for 6 people to eat food, $100 a day per person to eat food. That is astronomically high. Astronomically. Or we're counting on them having a pace of 14 votes per man hour. Ridiculous. I'm saying a reasonable cost is fine. And then if there's a discrepancy, declare what a major discrepancy is. Is it 5 points? Is it 2.5 percentage points? Because it depends on the race too. I mean, if you lose a race by 30 points, 10 points wouldn't be enough to be a major discrepancy, one could say. But I know if I'm worried about my election, if I'm going in to vote, 10 points, if it's only 2 percentage points off, 2-3 points could be a big difference, right? So what is a major discrepancy? That needs to be defined, but it is a astronomically high amount of money coming in. And those counts come in, and that is decided by a judge, state judge, deciding what the cost is. All I want to know is how do I get on that counting plan too? I want to know, because I would love. Look, if I'm getting $100 a day per diem, it probably is work from home. Speaking of working from home, look at that transition. Federal and state government looking at switching to a 3-day work week because Biden has failed on gas. Now, some of you are going to be like, Biden doesn't control gas. You're stupid. You don't understand the gas market. I said it. If you think Biden doesn't control gas prices, you are insane. Okay. Now, Biden himself, of course, doesn't literally get to decide that's that much and that's that much, but you're insane. Let me explain this to you. I love this. I love when people are like, everybody's having a gas issue everywhere. Well, because the gas industry, gas is a commodity, is traded on a US dollar. So if there's inflation in the US dollar, there's going to be inflation of fuel everywhere because it's the currency that fuel trades on. That's the first thing. But second thing is, for you guys who don't understand, America is also the 3rd largest country in the world. What we do affects everybody, just like what China's vid policies are doing and their lockdowns and everything else is affecting everybody else because it's affecting the supply chains. Okay? It affects everything. And so what has Biden done that's so different from Trump? He's stopped domestic drilling. Guys, this is real simple and easy for you to understand on how fuel works. It's a commodity. It's traded on a market, much like a stock. So let's pretend we look at gas as a stock. So you've got a stock of a company. What is that price based on? Well, it's based on what the market sets it at. Part of it's demand, part of it's supply. Well, demand goes up and demand goes down based upon some speculation of what the price is going to do. So in this case, and what I mean by that is price on the commodity market, not talking about demanding necessarily at the pump. I'm talking about the demand on the commodity market. If I believe gas is only going up in price on the commodity market, I'm buying futures, oil futures. If I believe it's going down, I'm not buying oil futures. That's the major indicator of it. And just like a stock, information goes in to the traders' minds that affect whether or not they believe the price is going to go up or down. So right now we have federal government not issuing leases. We have the federal government not pumping, giving them problems about giving them permits to drill. We've got issues with oil companies not being able to get financing because of some of the policies the Biden administration has taken. We also have the pipeline shutdowns. All that goes into a system that believes America's not going to pump more oil anytime soon. And so if America's not going to pump oil anytime soon, then we believe, the 3rd largest country, we believe then there's going to be more demand on the oil market, or where we've got the conflict in Russia, that 5 or 10%, however much of the oil market they make up. I think it's like 5%. That's going away. So we believe that demand, and it's going to trade at a higher price because America isn't pumping and Russia isn't pumping. However, if new piece of information comes into the market, like Joe Biden tomorrow says, we're going to allow, keep this in mind, discovered oil deposits owned by America is enough oil to fuel America for 400 plus years at our current demand rates. 400 plus years. Currently discovered known oil deposits. That doesn't include stuff that we haven't looked for yet because we have so much already that we haven't even bothered spending money to find anymore. Because why? But still, they're not issuing the leases. They're not issuing the permits. They're doing all these things. They're creating more regulatory holes to jump through because they don't like oil. They took a combative stance towards the oil companies. And so in turn, the market, the commodities, the future market believes price is only going to go up. So they're going to be buying at a higher rate, just like a stock. And so if we come out the information, hey, we're building the pipeline, we're allowing drilling, we're going to fund these, we're going to take this stance. We won't allow our pensions of our governments to be invested in with companies that are taking such a negative stance towards energy companies. That type of information going into the system can immediately drop fuel prices tomorrow because the commodities market changes and it starts to trade on that new information. Like a company posting the fact that it didn't hit its projected goals, even if it earned money, it didn't hit its projected goals, it'll go down in stock price because a piece of information came out. So that's how Joe Biden affects gas prices, and that's why it's his fault. But of course, government has done screwed it up. And the rest of us who don't work, who aren't government, employers especially, we're struggling through this. But the government, no. We don't have to make a profit. We don't even need to really provide a service. What are they going to do? Go elsewhere? They can't go elsewhere. So federal and state government, like here in Kentucky, supposed to do a 3-day work week to give employees 2 days to stay home so they don't have to drive to work to save on gas. I'm not kidding you. That's the reason why. The stated reason why. So our employees don't have to spend as much on gas. The government has failed in their ability to regulate our fuel costs properly because we've trusted them to do it. They shouldn't have this. First off, the president should have all this power. If there's one thing a Republican Congress should do, it should come in immediately and should start working towards removing energy policy from being in the power of one addled, Alzheimer-ridden man's hands, and instead, guy who can't form a sentence or eat pizza without looking weird, instead of putting it in his hands, put it into the hands of the legislature, where at least it's got, over 600 different people who vote on bills and have voices and everything else. So that way it's not power so concentrated in one person's hand. I'd rather we take a good hard look at how much we're regulating the market too at the same time, but at least let's move it over to Congress so our energy prices, our oil markets aren't doing this based upon whether we've got somebody in the office that can't remember his first name or if we've got somebody in the office that recognizes that domestic drilling and being energy independent is incredibly important, not only for the national security of our country, but also for the pocketbooks of Americans. The hope is they do that at least. And so we've got state, federal government switching to 3-day work week. Us private employers, we'll figure it out, right? That's right. We'll figure it out. I mean, we're not the government. So, we can't just do that. But they can. Good for them. Well, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for joining us and listening. Remember, every Tuesday morning, this goes onto the podcasting platforms. That's the Spotify, that's the Apples, that's all that. And then every Tuesday at noon, it's live on YouTube and Facebook. And you can grab the video version there. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and have a great afternoon or evening or morning, depending on what time you're listening.